Hello, we are back with the Good Life Podcast. I am Matt Carpenter, and I'm joined today for the first time with a return guest. Pastor Chris Wiley is with us. Chris, thank you for being here today.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Matt. Thanks for having me.
And we're actually in person this time, which is not something I had the privilege of doing very much. But I want to talk today with Chris about a new book he's writing. Last time we talked about his most previous book, In the House of Tom Bombadil, but today we're going to talk about another book he's writing. Chris, would you tell us a little bit about, I know you got several projects, but the one particular we're going to talk about today has to deal with communism.
Yes, maybe the new totalitarianism. I'm still a little up in the air about the title that I will propose, or I've actually have proposed the first title, the one that includes the word communism, but I'm having some thoughts. And then one of the things that maybe people don't know is that you're not entirely in control of the title of your book. So the proposed title is, or the working title is, How to Defeat Communism in Your Spare Time. And that's really a proxy. The name communism has been a proxy in my mind for what some people refer to as the new totalitarianism. So maybe it'll be how to defeat the new totalitarianism in your spare time, how to defeat communism in your spare time. But they're related. I mean, these are things that have a kind of common family ancestry. So,
well, in the 21st century, everyone has spare time on their hands, it seems like. Yeah. So if you're going to give yourself to a pastime, it might as well be defeating the new totalitarianism rather than, collecting something that is not worth quite as much. So what is your working premise of this book? Maybe just tell us what is this new totalitarianism? How does it contrast with the old type? And then what is your purpose really in pursuing this vein?
Well, in terms of totalitarianism and its past, there is a totalitarianism that found expression most, I think, famously with communism, but also with National Socialism in Germany. They were two, versions of the same thing. That's something that might strike people as a bit odd because the ideologies seem to be in conflict, and in certain ways they were, but they had more in common with each other than most folks appreciate. But what you have with the appeal of totalitarianism in the past is you have a world in which we find ourselves, and this has been the case for some time now, in which people have really lost kind of an intrinsic meaning when it comes to the life and its purpose. So, in the prior to the modern era, modernity, it was understood that the world came front-loaded with meaning. There was intrinsic meaning. Being a man meant something. Being a woman meant something. A community had an intrinsic meaning. The natural world was full of meaning. Modernity more or less bleached the meaning out of things. The upside to that has been a pretty rigorous, systematic approach to understanding the physical character of the world, and with the idea that we can disassemble it and reassemble it in ways that make our lives easier. Things like air conditioning, automobiles, antibiotics. Those are all great. We have those things because of this modern turn. But what was lost is meaning. So you have a crisis of meaning in the modern world and modernity, and totalitarian regimes are inspired by ideologies, and they impose meaning. Now, of course, that meaning has to be total, which means that everybody's on board. It's sort of like, you remember those old Western films where the bad guy enters the bar and, when I drink, everybody drinks. That kind of thing. Yeah, my name's Adolf Hitler. When I think something is so, everyone has to think it's so. I'm Stalin. Everybody has. So if we're going to pull off this communal project, of imposing meaning on a meaningless world, we all have to be on board. There's no room for freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, etc. We all have to be on board with this. Otherwise, we're not going to pull this off. So that's what totalitarian is, sort of generally speaking. There's a political expression, but there's also kind of intellectual life that goes along with it and so forth. But the new totalitarianism, what makes the situation that we find ourselves in today both more, I guess, disturbing, but at the same time, I think there's actually a prospect that maybe these people could actually get a little closer to what they want to pull off done. Is in both fascism, particularly in the expression that we see with the Nazis, and with communism, you have the mad guy, sort of the demagogue, this person who is just obsessed with bringing this to pass, who's ruthless in pursuit of this vision, this utopian vision. Today, we don't need the mad scientist, so to speak, or the crazy political guy. In fact, what we might find is a kind of spontaneous totalitarianism that emerges through the technology and through almost a kind of a voluntary cooperation and sort of spontaneous joining of the larger project by just institutions everywhere you look, educational institutions, even business corporations, etc. So there's no person or political party necessarily that's maniacally pulling strings or levers or pushing buttons. This is all kind of spontaneously emerging from what appears to be out of nothing. And you're like, what is going on? People are getting canceled, lives are getting ruined, careers are being put to an end. One thing to say about the new totalitarianism, at least at this phase, it has a cleaner, less brutal, physically brutal sort of character. So we're more.
You catch more flies with poison honey than with concrete and guillotines.
Well, that's definitely the case, but also the optics are better. So, I think one of the things that totalitarians learned in the past is that it's not a good thing for your cause to have a lot of, film with emaciated people being discovered half naked in a concentration camp. It doesn't help the cause. So the optics are better this time. They're very, I think, the people who are sort of helping this all along are very conscious of public opinion, and they know how to sort of cover their tracks better, how to make it look more sanitary, more humane, that kind of thing.
They look like they're giving people, they are giving people what they want.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider all the apps, all the technological things that supposedly companies give you. You can sign up for this app, you can get it on your phone, and it's free. But actually, it's not free.
Right.
I mean, there's the ads that they have, but it's more than that. They also have a lot of your information.
Yep.
Now, they're discovering what you like, and this is just one element to this. But that's one. But then there's also, in the political realm, it's a more passive-aggressive form. Yeah. They can easily save face when, if someone ever tries to blow the whistle, a bureaucrat can say, well, they had a choice.
Right.
You didn't have to do this.
Yeah, you didn't have to, get vaxxed, even though it was going to cost you your job, and perhaps your friends and that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's a good point, and I think that's absolutely right. I think there's plausible deniability always in the sort of the picture today, whereas in the past that might have been something that was factored in but wasn't necessarily as high on the agenda. In fact, one of the things you see in the literature, so there was a lot of things that were written in the wake of World War II, and everybody was wondering what happened. How did how could 6 million Jews or however many there were. I know that some people debate the number, but I don't think anybody denies a bunch of Jews were murdered. And the same thing with the Soviet Union. How many Ukrainians died in the famines? There's there are people who actually get really exercised about whether or not it was 30 million or only 20. But there was a lot of death. So with all of that, you had the audacity, that was just hard to believe, and that was actually a technique. Hannah Arendt documents that what you would have with totalitarians, they would tell you exactly what they were going to do, but because the actions were so audacious and horrible, no one could believe. They thought, oh, it's just hyperbole. They're not actually going to try to kill all the Jews. But they said, we will kill all the Jews. So they didn't hide it at all. In fact, that was in a sense the genius of it. So like when I was a kid, I've got a confession to make. I wasn't always like a really good kid. I did things that I would punish my kids for. But one of those things is that you learned when you were stealing, when I was a kid, is audacity works in your favor. If you just walk around with an air of confidence, people don't sort of think the worst. If you're sort of sort of looking surreptitiously over your shoulder, if you're like very very self-conscious, well, you are the object of suspicion. Yeah, so this is like Catch Me If You Can, that film. You just you go in, you act like you know what you're doing, and people more or less give you the credit. Well, yeah, he knows what he's doing. But that's how those guys operated. They were like, this is what we're gonna do. And everybody like, oh, it's just an exaggeration. They're just trying to play mind games. And then they would do it, and then no one would believe it, even after it was discovered to be the case.
Right. Well, which is how the Soviet Union could go so long.
Yeah.
With defenders in the American and British press. I know, and I'm sure there was others, but I don't read other languages. So, defending them, saying, "Of course not. They're really great. They're good people,
right.
And they're trying to pursue the good of their people in a different way."
Right.
But you hear the same thing from our politicians right now.
Yeah. I do think you see that particularly with the World Economic Forum. They will just say the craziest stuff, or things that you assume are just totally crazy, and you say, well, they can't really mean it. No one really could believe that would be feasible. And then the next thing you know, they're shutting down the farmers in Sri Lanka and the Netherlands, doing exactly what they said they were going to do, and possibly in the process bringing about food shortages and stuff like that. We'll see how it all plays out coming up in next year's harvest.
Right. So you mentioned Hannah Arendt. She is one thinker, philosopher who's contributed in a significant way to this discussion. Who are some others who have influenced your thinking with regards to totalitarianism, and who will probably show up in your book?
Well, there's Matthias Desmet, whose recent book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, it really does some, in that book he has some great analysis, and he approaches the subject in a couple of ways that you don't see with, say, Arendt or others. But there, as you noted, Hannah Arendt and her great book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. Another one that's a great read and isn't a difficult read, it's not a very long book, is The True Believer by Eric Hoffer.
Yes.
That's great.
He's a fascinating character in his own right.
Yeah, I've got a theory about him, and I'll let you in on it in a minute. There's another one, Joost Meerloo, who is a psychologist from the Netherlands.
I won't correct you on that.
That's right. Yeah, I have no idea how that name is supposed to be pronounced, but it's Joost, and then Meerloo, Meerloo. It's like I couldn't believe it when I read it, but he wrote a book entitled The Rape of the Mind, and it's a study of the techniques that were used by particularly the communists, but also the Nazis, to break the will and to more or less turn you into a puppet. So those are a few that come to mind. Another one, I think Gustav Lebon, who wrote The Crowd, late 19th century. So he was an early, I guess, theorist of the psychology that we see in crowds. At that point, he's reflecting primarily on the French Revolution. He, he's kind of an interesting read for a range of reasons. One of those being that some of the things he has to say about social groups and so forth would just not, be permitted to be published today.
Right. There's certain things you could get away with in the late 1800s
Right.
that you can't get away with.
Right.
Well, you can't even get away with it 60 years ago, much less
Right.
now.
Yeah, I think that's right. But he's been helpful, and I'm continuing to poke into different places to see if there might be other material to work with. But the lay of the land is pretty, I think, easy to see. So the book I'm going to write, or I'm in the process of writing, it will have two parts. Essentially, kind of a philosophical, moral analysis and political analysis of totalitarianism. Sort of why are the conditions in our world today conducive to totalitarianism? What makes totalitarianism something new under the sun? Because it is. It's something that could only have come about in the modern age. Obviously, we have tyrants in the past, but it's a different kind of thing. It's not just simply a crazy guy. This is a very different and more, I think, ambitious project when you're talking about totalitarianism. So that's the first half of the book, and the second half of the book will deal with, what can you do? How do you respond? How do you defeat this? And the title, How to Defeat Communism in Your Spare Time, is actually intended to say a couple things at once. One is totalitarians are people who themselves have become dominated by, intellectually and even in the course of their lives, an inhuman I guess a human denying ideology. These ideologies are what they actually live for, and these ideologies have taken possession of them. And one of the best ways to defeat totalitarianism is to have a life. So, one of the things that you see with the history of totalitarianism is that essentially the people who are driving the movements don't really have much to live for. They're kind of pitiful in certain ways. They've got, big dreams, but so did, lots of cartoon characters that we make fun of.
Right. Well, so it reminded me when you were talking about that just now of a story about someone who some on the left consider a totalitarian, which the left does not consider many people that, but the late dictator of Spain, Francisco Franco,
Yeah.
which I'm not claiming him for sainthood at all, but I remember a story Dr. Stanley Payne told in one of his books on Spain during the Franco era. He said that an out of the country correspondent was interviewing a Spanish fisherman, and this, of course, this press agent was very much a man of the left, and he's talking to this poor Spanish fisherman, and he's asking him, he said, "Don't you care about politics?" He said, "Doesn't it disturb you, the oppression that you face?" Which is really rich considering where it was coming from. But the fisherman said, "Franco takes care of the politics, so I can take care of my fishing."
Yeah.
Which is the opposite
Right.
of what you're talking about.
Right.
When, this displays an attitude that was more common, at least at the time in that country, that the people were not as politically minded, but they could enjoy what they were doing. Whereas a true totalitarian wants everyone marching lockstep.
Well, totalitarians believe that everything is politics. What you think is politics, the way your home life is ordered is politics. The more traditional understanding, the classical understanding, is there are pre-political institutions. And what that implies is that the world comes front-loaded with meaning. So the world comes front-loaded with meaning. That means that my relationship to my wife is a pre-political institution. We're married. Now we can engage in political life, but what political life is understood to be is how do we order our common life as the city. So the city, the polis, or the country, if we take it to the next level, is something that we deliberate over and try to order in a way that's to everyone's best and serves everyone's best interest. Of course, there are going to be classes, there are going to be disagreements, there's going to be conflict, and a political order is an environment in which those disagreements can be debated and compromises can be reached, hopefully, and so forth. But that's not a totalitarian outlook. A totalitarian outlook is predicated upon the idea that there is no front-loaded meaning, that the political order is political from front to back, from the inside of your head to the halls of power in the Politburo or whatever. So there are no boundaries. Everything is in play. And we see this kind of thing on the left all the time, particularly with the idea that the personal is political. So that's a classic totalitarian stance. So often the feminists will use this argument that the personal is political. You're sleeping with the enemy and that kind of stuff. And what they're getting at is that there is no front-loaded meaning. Everything is power. Power and its exercise is what politics are all about. And the more traditional understanding is no. The world has a creator. There are certain things that are just so. We receive those things gladly, as gifts. But there's still obviously a lot to do in order to determine what is the best sort of arrangement when it comes to how we live our lives together, and what should we do next? Should we, require everybody in this neighborhood to install, a common sewer system, or is a set of septic systems good enough? That kind of thing. We don't get into the homes and intrude when it comes to, in a classical order, intrude into the minutiae when it comes to the care and the education of children. A good political order will say, if we're going to have a virtuous citizenry, we need to have an educated citizenry, and it's really incumbent upon parents to do their best to educate their children well. And by the way, these are some things that would really are important to know if you're going to be a citizen in this country. But when it comes to who's responsible for the education of the child, in a totalitarian regime, it's the government. In a free society, a traditionally ordered society, it's the parents.
Which briefly, it makes me think of what I consider to be one of the best satirical treatments. This is debated, but satirical treatments of this society is Plato's Republic.
Yeah.
And some people think he was not being satirical at all.
Uh-huh.
But there's a lot going on there. But when Socrates is asked at first, what is the ideal society?
Right.
It is not anything that looks like totalitarianism.
Right.
It's families working together, and But then, when he's then pressed, they said, no, Socrates, that's not what we're talking about. A society that makes a lot of money, that becomes very wealthy. How do you get that? And then he launches into this huge explanation, which does include enforced government education. All of these marks that one would consider for this. So, when you're talking about power and the pursuit of power, I can't help but go immediately to Marx because that's how he viewed all relation. I mean, he viewed relationships in a material fashion,
Sure.
material only. So, of course, people think of him as just as a communist, but there was a lot more to what he's doing than merely taking away from the rich and spreading property evenly.
Yeah, he wasn't Robin Hood,
Right.
and he wasn't even your mom saying share your pizza.
Right.
You know, when people say stupid stuff like communism is a wonderful idea, it's just the implementation that's been the problem. No, you don't understand communism at all if you say something stupid like that. So, what is communism? Well, communism is based on a set of convictions about the world that we live in, and there are certain things that are givens in the mind of Marx, but in also people who consider themselves Marxists. And one of those givens is that, as you noted, we live in a meaningless world, that the world doesn't come front-loaded with meaning, that it's essentially without form and void, and without a purpose, an end, a telos. Neither of those things are compatible with the Christian faith. But weirdly, some Christians think that you can use Marx, to further Christian programs or, values or policies or whatever. Yeah, I've run into them. But so if that's the case, how do things happen? Well, what Marx is responding to, and many of the people in the sort of early and mid-modern periods in philosophy, they're reacting to Aristotle. They're responding to Aristotle. So when Aristotle explains why things are the way they are, he says there are basically four causes. Two of the causes I've already mentioned, the form and the end. So the form, if we're talking about a human being, so there's a human nature, okay? There's something given. It's not something that we have the power to refashion in the most fundamental sense. So human beings in the past share a common nature with human beings in the present. But also an end. What are human beings for? And we see in Aristotle his proposed answer to that is happiness, right? And then you get someone like Thomas Aquinas and says, well, that's not sufficient. We need to fill that out. The beatific vision. Bliss in God. Right? That's the end, and that's completely simpatico with the Bible. All things are made by Him and for Him, and so forth. So now the other two causes are the material and the efficient causes. Material is what something's made out of. So what is human being made out of? Well, human being's made out of, the physical elements that we find all around us, right? And then how does that come to be, formed in the way that it is, and that's the efficient cause. So the power, the power to bring something to pass. So if you take away the forms and you take away the ends, and all you're left with is matter and motion, power and stuff, then the only way you can explain kind of the sort of the process by which things come to be as they are is through kind of the vast sort of possible range of options. When we talk about, say, things that have some chance of coming to be, so we're talking about essentially chance, and then we're talking about forces in some kind of conflict, collision. So things come about through an agonistic process. Agonism is a term that's used in philosophy to talk about things coming into being through struggle. So if you keep those things in mind, and then go to Marx. And so Marx says that what we have is we've got in the course of human history forces in violent conflict with each other. Social classes. So social classes are understood purely in terms of the material goods that they possess and the power that those classes possess. and then you have conflict. And when those conflicts are resolved, you have a kind of a new situation, and there's a kind of process that unfolds over time. This is kind of the Hegelian spirit, in Marx. But what Marx did is he gave his whole system a kind of pseudoscientific gloss. So what he referred to as scientific dialectic, which is this idea that that there is a kind of end in the order of things. And what is it? Well, it's entropy. It's heat death. So when a society's goods are evenly distributed and its power is evenly distributed, there's a kind of scientific resolution to this process. And what that means is everybody is absolutely sort of flat. Everything's kind of flattened. Now, in the actual physical world, when that occurs, we have a name for that. Death. A human body is a hierarchy. A human society is also necessarily a hierarchy. And this is what the totalitarians will never come clean on, particularly those with a Marxist bent. They'll talk about, this is like just a phase, to get to this, idyllic vision that is, there for us to enjoy in the future. But you never get there. And so, anyway, I've kind of rambled on, but but that's how the Marxist program works, and that's also why, in sort of a Marxist way of thinking, ethics really has a kind of secondary role. It's not primary. So whatever kind of justifies this process is perfectly fine. It's in accord with it. It doesn't call it into question. It's not a basis to judge it. Because there is no basis for ethics apart from material relations. There's no transcendent source of meaning or truth to which you can appeal or point to and say, what you did when you wiped out all those Ukrainians was wrong. So, but anyway, there you go. That's what you have with those guys.
So the alternative then is, well, let me back up. Before we get to the alternative, we don't have to worry about classic Marxism coming, say, to the United States. The only places I know where you can find true Marxists are usually universities and probably in their just almost retirement stage at this point. But there is a type of the American spirit of Marxism, sometimes called cultural Marxism, that does continue now that we deal with. So how does that inform the way people are doing things now?
Yeah, there are important ways in which contemporary scene, economically but also socially, shares certain things in common with the Marxist outlook. For example, intrinsic meaning is something that's lost on most people. We got some guys outside with sounds like a leaf blower.
Yes, they are not Marxist, I don't think.
Right. But what that implies then is that in the same way that Marxists historically felt or believed that the world was more or less subject to our power to shape and form in the ways that we would like, we in the contemporary West agree now. So you very rarely hear anyone make arguments based upon sort of human nature anymore, or because nature is understood merely to be a purposeless process. There's no intrinsic meaning to being a human being. So like a person like Peter Singer, teaches at Princeton. He's famous for having said something to the effect, this is a paraphrase, can't remember the way he said it precisely, but more or less, a pig is a boy and a boy is a pig. In other words, we're just talking about kind of biological machinery. And what can we see in a boy that would make him, would distinguish him from a pig? They share a number of things. They've, got, certain biological processes that are occurring within them. Instead of, say, the classical understanding, which would see in the human beings something that was unique to human nature, that would distinguish human beings from other creatures, rationality, things of that sort. So many, well-educated people, I can't call them intelligent, but they're well-educated, look at the world this way. And consequently, there's also a strong emphasis on equality, which means that anyone's kind of project doesn't have any necessarily better basis to justify itself than anyone else's. So if nothing means anything, and we're all considered equal, that means your maybe desire to realize your lifelong dream of being a lion, is something that is just as good as somebody's lifelong dream of building a rocket ship to go to Mars, or someone's lifelong dream to have a family and children. We can't make meaningful distinctions between these things because there's no intrinsic meaning to anything. So we're in a position where we have to honor everybody's desires, projects equally. You want me to respect your desire to have a wife and children? Well, respect my desire to be Simba. You may say I'm crazy, but I think you're crazy. That kind of thing.
So because there's no way to adequately judge.
Right.
So then wrapping up, what are, and I know you've not finished the book yet,
right,
but what are some things that people can do, and I know you've already hinted at this a little bit, what are some things people can do to go against this general spirit of the age?
Yeah, I think the first thing that you need to do is recognize the thumb screws. What are the thumb screws? So there are a lot of thumb screws that are employed, and one of the reasons why we're so disappointed with some of our leaders is that they are experiencing the thumb screws. They're on the rack, and they're being forced to under various forms of pressure, renounce things they believe in, or get quiet about those things, or whatever, or try to find some third way, where we can all be happy. But so learn to identify the thumb screws, and then I think there are some spiritual disciplines that you need to develop. One of those is so we live in a world where people talk about cancer culture. Basically, it's social death. So we use social media to kill people socially, cancel them so that they can't work where they've been employed, can't bank where they banked, that kind of stuff. So the thing we need to learn to do in terms of spiritual discipline is cancel ourselves first. So if we can learn to do that, and what does that mean? Well, think about the worst case scenario and accept it. Just accept it. Just say, okay, this could happen to me unless I go along with these folks. And then if you die inwardly to the social environment that you're afraid of losing contact with, then you're free. So it's a way of freeing yourself from the thumb screws. Getting back to our earlier comments about the sanitary approach that we take to things today. Now, maybe things will no longer be sanitary after a time, and they actually will come for you and take you away to a concentration camp. Well, then you'll need some other disciplines. But until then, then at that point we're just dealing with about concerning practical matters. How do I survive? And that kind of thing. And you need other people. You need people that you rely on. And so you kind of build it out from there.
So that reminds me a little bit of Ernst Jünger, the German.
Yep.
Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, yeah. He was the Nazi officer who was
Right.
stationed in Paris, right?
Yes.
Right.
And
But he
his
was
book,
like half-hearted Nazi.
right. Well, I mean, he was not. He fought for the Nazis.
Sure.
He himself was not a Nazi. He disagreed. He survived.
He was a German, and he was a soldier.
Yeah, he was a patriot.
Yeah.
He loved his country, but he wrote The Forest Passage
Mm-hmm.
about the mindset that men needed to live in this future totalitarian society that he saw coming. He was predicting in the 1950s.
Yeah, yeah.
Because he saw the way that technical man was going.
Yeah.
That people viewed technology in the 1950s as having won the war for the Allies. And he saw that as being the driving force that everyone would pursue from then on out. So,
And this gets to another important boundary line that classical thought maintained that you don't see with totalitarianism, and that's the boundary between the human and the machine.
yes.
Which gets us into a whole different conversation with transhumanism and stuff.
Yes, which does seriously deserve its own
Right.
consideration. But I know you and the podcast guys have talked about this a few times, so I would refer our listeners to some of your conversations there. But so when do you expect the book? Well, I know you may not know when it'll be published. When do you hope that things will be out?
Well, my contract says it's due in February. So usually we're talking 3 to 6 months after you get the manuscript in, that everything is edited and ready to roll.
Okay. So you have that, and then of course you have some other works coming up as well.
Yeah, working on a commentary on the Book of Acts, which is kind of on the shelf at the moment because of the pressure. I'm under the thumb screws. That's right. That's right. And then I've got a couple of children's books. One is a young adult book that I know a lot of people have been waiting for the sequel for a long, long time. And I thought I had it done. But then the editors wanted me to do some more work. So this is like the third time they've sent it back to me to do some more work. So I mean, I get their point. You know, there's some things that are worth revisiting in the manuscript. But you know, I'm under the gun with these other projects too. And then I've got a children's picture book that I chip away at every now and then.
Okay, but yes, for those who don't know, Chris has done really good work as an artist as well. So, are you illustrating that?
Yep.
Good. So you'll be able to see those in time.
Yeah. The story was the easy part. It's drawing all the drawings. It takes a long time.
All right. Well, Chris, thanks for joining us today. This has been really helpful. Good things to think about, and we will look forward to your book coming out hopefully within the next year.
Yep. Thank you, Matt.